Welcome to the Rimworld mod rundown. We'll be taking a quick look at what you can expect to see from Vanilla Factions Expanded Settlers. For starters, you'll need to own the additional workshop content, Vanilla Expanded Framework, and Harmony. Now, correct me if I'm wrong on this, but I believe this is the oldest faction mod that's still supported as of recording. Settlers seems almost quaint by today's standards of mod interactions and integrations, with a very straightforward offering of a new storyteller, scenario, a handful of thematic weapons, apparel, buildings, factions and events, as well as the odd extra, like a new plant and beverage. Settlers carves out a small niche in the early stages of the industrial research, allowing you to live your most rootin' tootin' life possible, while still including some viable events and options for most colonies heading through the mid-game. Let's break this down into sections and make it nice and easy then. First up is the Storyteller, Diego Dyer. This storyteller plays like a flipped Cassandra classic, so instead of climbing your way up the wealth ladder with nice events that help you face nasty ones, you're starting at the bottom with all the filth and you are left to claw your way out of it, with the events eventually balancing back out once you've managed to find your footing. Playing Diego will also increase the probability that you're given the new events added in with Settlers. These events are broken into one negative, one neutral, and two quests. The negative event is the protection fee, which may or may not have consequences. Both of the events, the real and the fake out, are worded exactly the same, so you won't know if you're playing with a live grenade or not. You can agree to the demands, pay the silver and carry on with your colony, or you can tell them where to shove it and prepare to potentially have to deal with the consequences. This event can fire from any hostile faction too, so you can be extorted from Neanderthal tribes all the way up to Waster pirates. Make sure you take note of the faction name so you know who to expect knocking at your door. It'll allow you to more easily prepare for their arrival.
What's up? Not much, how you been? High five!
The neutral event is Chemshine Muffalos, or rather it was Chemshine Muffalos. I've searched all the menus I can think of for this event and it just isn't there. I've definitely had this happen in a previous colony when I was streaming the game as well, but I don't even see it in the list of potential events to trigger on the map anymore, and that's including using Diego as a storyteller too. Muffalo are still able to misbehave with Chemshine even if they aren't spawned via this event though, and we'll get over what kind of chaos Chemshine can cause later. The new quests are a caravan raid and a bounty. These are both presented to you as a quest that is automatically active, so the timer will start ticking the second they appear. The caravan raid is exactly what it sounds like. The main complication with assaulting a caravan on such a small overworld map is making sure you deal with the pack animals before the faction attempts to flee, as the last thing you want them to do is get to the edge of the map and disappear with all of your loot. They can be extremely lucrative, but you are going to need to bring a good amount of colonists to carry all of this loot back. The bounty quest is a little more involved and will take a couple of stages to complete, with multiple rewards offered along the way. The first part of the quest involves dealing with the bounty itself, by travelling to the marked safe house and attacking the target and their guards. Causing enough damage to make them flee will count as a success for the first reward, which is going to be the items listed in the quest itself. If you also want the large silver bounty, you're going to need to make sure you bring down the actual target before they leave the map, either by braining them or causing enough injury to make them fall down. The silver reward for the bounty is doubled if you can manage to keep them alive however, so if you have the non-lethal weapons pack installed, or if you fancy giving them a bit of a run around while letting the blood loss do its thing, you'll be in a much better position reward wise. Either way, you need to take the body, living or dead, back to a base of the faction that initially offered you the quest. You'll know the body is wanted because it has a unique effect in its health tab to show it. Once handed over, the faction will reward you, usually handsomely, and then send you on your way. Bounty hunting can be extremely good business if you have a reliable hit squad that can take people down with no accidents. Speaking of returning bounties to factions, let's go over the 3 new ones included with Settlers. You're going to have a civil settlement, a rough settlement, and a bandit group. The bandits will always be hostile, and the civil and rough settlements follow the same logic as a standard union, even offering the same traders of bulk, combat, slaver, and exotic. You can expect these factions to make liberal use of the new gear included with the mod, as well as coming pretty stacked with industrial level armour too. So despite their slightly earlier approach to tech, they still pose just as much threat as a standard Union faction. The faction bases of these three will also have some unique generation, with a Wild West style central street and assorted buildings on either side, so if you decide it's high noon and want to stroll into town and declare yourself the best gunslinger around, you have got that option. In terms of gunslinging, you can also start with the bandit scenario, which is one of the most downright cruel I think I've covered so far. Whilst other scenarios might have a difficult starting position, map, or high wealth amounts, the bandit scenario starts you off hostile to everyone, with the big caveat being you will eventually be able to ally with factions that would normally have been permanently hostile. Eventually, anyway. So for a really long time you're going to say goodbye to trade caravans and visitors. This scenario will start you off with the same research as a standard crash landed crew, but you'll be rocking an extra colonist. You've got more dakka, some sculptures and a good chunk of silver, that of course you can't spend because everyone hates you. You'll notice that I didn't mention anything like steel, wood, meds or even food there. This is a brutal start. At least with Naked Brutality you're only looking after one person at the very beginning. Now you've got 4 hungry mouths to feed and hopefully you picked a map that will support it. A nice tough little start if you want to go for a really violent run. So let's cover this new gear. First up we got the weapons, with most unlocked via gunsmithing, so the first stage of firearms research is going to get you pretty much all you need to look the part weapons wise. The double action revolver is a shorter range, less accurate, faster aiming but longer cooldown alternative to your standard revolver. And it's got the slight change that it also fires 3 round bursts. If you watch the rundown for the Frontier weapons pack, you'll know that they also looked the part for settlers and included that high roller mechanic for critical hits. None of the standard weapons from settlers use this high roller mechanic. What you see is what you get, and the double action revolver is a hell of a lot of firepower for just 5 more steel and a little extra work, compared to a standard revolver. Not to be outdone, next is the double-barreled shotgun. It's got the same range, damage, stopping power, and just a little bit less accuracy and a slightly longer cooldown compared to a pump shotgun. This also ups the burst count, throwing out a second devastating blast of pellets. And again, it costs just 5 more steel than a standard pump shotgun. The weapons included with settlers are pretty objectively better, which in some way I do understand, as if you want to lock yourself to just using gear that fits with the theme of the Old West, you'd get absolutely splattered the second another faction turns up with assault rifles and chain shotguns, which is right logistically, but it makes the more roleplay oriented theme of the game a little bit more difficult to pull off.
Alright, you primitive screwheads, listen up. This is my boomstick!
From there you've got the hunting rifle. This is a bolt action rifle with an attached scope, costing just 1 more component to make. It has increased range and better medium to long accuracy, whilst taking slightly longer to cycle shots because of its increased aiming and cooldown time. This extra range pushes the weapon just up to 3 tiles less than a standard sniper rifle, so providing you're taunting the AI out a little bit by baiting them with a target, you should be able to outgun them even if they've got the longest distance weapons possible. In smithing, you unlock the Tomahawk. Whilst this weapon can be built out of practically anything, from wood to stone to steel, it'll only be impacting its melee stats and value. The range damage that it inflicts is always the same. Whilst the Tomahawk has an incredibly short range with a very long aiming time, likely going to get you caught up in melee combat if you're trying to use it yourself, it also packs a significant chunk of stopping power. It's got decent accuracy and a pretty sizable chunk of damage on hit too. It'll easily be outranged by things like bows, but they're not capable of causing a target to stop dead in their tracks upon being hit. Typically, this is going to be something enemies will be using against you rather than the other way around, so don't be fooled by the appearance of a wooden tomahawk being thrown your way. That thing will still pack a wallop. Dynamite is the throwable weapon of choice, made at a machining bench and unlocked as standard, so you'll have access to this whenever you get your hands on the bench. This deals an ungodly amount of damage in a 5x5 area. The major risk with dynamite is that not all the fuses are created equally. Often it lands and rolls around on the floor for a few seconds before exploding. Sometimes it explodes mid-air and injures whoever was unlucky enough to be underneath it at the time, and occasionally it barely makes it out of the user's hand before it goes off, with its damage profile being so high that it normally causes horrific loss of limbs or outright death. These are fun and terrifying to watch the AI use, as I've had more than a few raids that simply flee after some idiot uses one of these and kills 6 of their own guys in the process. I didn't even have to get my colonists out of bed.
I'm gonna set the whole thing off with this. The Finger Blaster. Ah! My thumb!
For clothing, you've got 5 additions, all coming in at complex clothing. The sombrero offers some hefty insulation from the heat, as well as a decent bonus to your shooting accuracy, as it helps keep the sun out of your eyes. Whilst wearing a tailored helmet isn't exactly going to offer you much in the way of protection from bullets going into your brain, these are useful for keeping colonists alive during heat waves in already hot climates. The flat cap provides significantly less heat insulation than the sombrero, but it does give you a little bit more protection from the cold, while still being a tailored hat, so it doesn't hold up to any attacks. This allows you to better tip your cap to prisoners and traders, providing a negotiation bonus of 5%. The bandana slides under the radar but is actually pretty damn awesome. Because of the layer this thing occupies, it's one of the few bits of clothing that can be worn with something like a simple helmet, while still providing a good chunk of insulation from the cold, a little tox resist, and offsetting the pain shock threshold by 5%. It's also stupidly cheap to make, so these are practically a free stat bonus to colonists before you progress to full helmets like marine gear. The vest is a middle layer choice that has standard values all around. For most this will be fighting against something like wearing a flak vest, as it's only going to cover the torso, so you're still getting no protection to arms or shoulders for wearing this instead. The main benefit of the vest is its social impact bonus, which is different to the negotiation bonus on the flat cap. Social impact doesn't affect trade, recruitment, peace talks, or conversions. It only matters for opinion modifiers, like good or bad conversations, so unfortunately the bonus just isn't that important in most scenarios, as in the majority of cases having multiple conversations will provide the same effect as having a high social impact, and you're never really pressed for time when it comes to forming a social bond. These aren't Sim-style quests where you need to get multiple friends in order to gain a promotion. So this same logic then carries over with the Great Dress, which improves social impact by 20%. The dress is a little more interesting in its coverage though, providing protection to the torso, shoulders, and legs in just one piece of clothing. Plus it's only the skin layer that it counts towards as well, so you can still pair this with a duster and a flak vest if you really wanted to. It's not bad for only 60 fabric, making it 20 materials cheaper than a pants and t-shirt combo, which gives the same amount of coverage. Now from gear, you've got goods, and only the best of course, Chemshine, a nice social drug that has a surprisingly lenient safe dose interval as well as a very reasonable minimum tolerance for addiction, with no random overdose chance. On the other hand, unlike beer, Chemshine does come with an extra effect or two. When consumed, the drinker will get an effect on their health tab known as Chemshined. This effect has 4 stages and lasts for a pretty damn good amount of time, so you'll want to be careful in how fast your colonists are necking this. At its worst stage it lowers pain experience to just 40%, whilst causing 10% pain. It halves consciousness and improves movement and manipulation by 20%. Now as we all know, a buff to manipulation and movement doesn't mean a lot when you've got lowered consciousness. It's more of a offset to the debuff than providing an actual benefit. As well as that halved consciousness from Chemshine, they'll also have a pounding headache, which further lowers it and causes a significant mood debuff.
Woke up with a bit of a hangover.
At Major, this lowers pain to 60%, consciousness to 75%, and increases movement and manipulation by 10%, while still causing that hangover debuff too. When this eventually falls to its standard level of just being Chemshined, it lowers pain to 80%, consciousness to 90%, and increases movement and manipulation by 5%. Over time, this will eventually fade to minor, lowering pain to 90% and increasing manipulation by 5%, before eventually disappearing entirely. That isn't the only thing that Chemshine is doing though. The bigger the debuff, the larger the fiery AoE explosion will be when the affected colonist dies, making Chemshined enemies or animals essentially walking IEDs. This is where those pesky muffalo come back into the discussion. They will quite happily drink themselves, essentially to death, on any Chemshine that you happen to have. This includes muffalo that you are ranching as well as those that are in the wild, so be careful keeping this stuff around in the open. You could previously make traders drop essentially their entire stock by getting their muffalo drunk with this, but that might have been patched out at some point, as I can't seem to get them to black out anymore. If this is an interaction you're really not down to mess with, there's an option in the mod settings to turn it off. You'll also find a setting in there to increase or decrease the minimum and maximum amount of silver offered by a bounty quest, but I find the default honestly pretty reasonable. And it's all well and good talking about Chemshine anyway, but how do we actually make it? That'd be through the use of the Chemshine barrel, unlocked via biofuel refining. Unlike brewing with wort, Chemshine is pretty cheerful with its temperature range, allowing you to ferment it between -1 and 40 degrees C, with each barrel costing only 10 steel and 30 wood, then taking a further 50 chem fuel to fill. It isn't that hard to get a successful Chemshine operation up and running, with that 50 chem fuel becoming 25 Chemshine, basically doubling its worth. And with settlers, it's now easier than ever to get your hands on chem fuel, with the new plantable Chemroot. This does need a pretty skilled planter to handle, however, with a minimum skill of 10, making it even harder than Healroot to cultivate. It also comes in with a fairly lengthy growing period too, taking around 24 days to completely mature and produce 5 chem fuel per plant. Of course, it's much cheaper to look after than a boomalope, and it can be kept away from flammable materials a little bit easier too, as it won't need penning in. Equally though, your Chemroot fields are going to be extremely vulnerable to flash storms and the like, as a single ignition on one of these plants will likely see the entire field go up in flames, unless you checkerboard them, but honestly, who has the time for that? And surprisingly, despite all of the cowboy theming, you won't be able to cook and grow the staple food of any good frontier diet.
Beans!
So don't panic about mood or opinion debuffs because of a certain funk going around the colony. Finally, we've got the new buildings to round out this whole thing. Coming in without any need for research, you have the circular table, saloon door, and post. The circular table is great for tight spaces or a little bit of set dressing, although its artwork does show its age a little, as something about the perspective is just off. It's one of those things that you know when you see it, but you can't pinpoint why immediately. The saloon door is cheaper than a standard wooden door, and it opens twice as quickly, allowing colonists to absolutely fly around the base. Unfortunately, this door is about as strong as a wet paper bag and will fall off its hinges if someone leans on it slightly too hard. The post works exactly the same as a column, whilst costing a little bit less to build, at the expense of providing a more fragile support to any roof that it's holding up. Thematically, these look great as pergolas or patio covers. The next batch of structures are unlocked with complex furniture, getting you the bar stool, chem lamp post, chem boiler, faro, and 5-finger fillet tables. The bar stool has a similar issue to the circular table. The perspective is just not there, especially noticeable when you pair them up side by side. The chem lamp and chem lamp post give you a lighting option for inside or outside of your base that slowly consumes chem fuel at a rate of 10 units every 10 days. If you're playing with chem fuel expanded, these can be hooked up to the pipe networks to keep them automatically fueled. This also works with the chem boiler, a simple heater that costs 100 steel and 75 chem fuel, whilst also taking a sizable chunk of space too. This will chew through 75 chem fuel every 7 days, making it an extremely thirsty bitch indeed. Due to the simple nature of its construction, you also can't control its temperature output. It makes things warm, that's it.
Marge, can you set the oven to cold?
The faro and 5-finger tables are the new options for recreation, with faro providing cerebral and 5-finger opting for dexterity, with a minor boost to melee experience at the cost of occasionally causing cuts and minor injuries to the user's fingers. It's up to you whether you want the security of a horseshoe pin or the slow trickle gain of experience at the cost of occasionally wasting meds and time. Then from electricity, there's the windmill, which is a little bit different to the turbine. The windmills are tighter, occupying only 3 tiles wide rather than the 7 of a wind turbine. They do, however, still need the same width of space free in front and behind them. The easiest point of comparison is that 3 turbines occupy the same space as 7 windmills, with the turbines offering 6,900 watts of power at peak and the windmills going up to just 5,600, so you're getting less power output overall. But these windmills only cost 50 steel and 75 wood to make. They have absolutely no component cost. Unfortunately, if the windmills do break down, they still need components to repair, so the savings are only in setup, not in maintenance. Useful if you're tight on steel and rich in wood though, for something to tide you over. And finally, from gunsmithing, you have the Gatling gun. This thing is another one of those meme defense options. Objectively worst in most cases than just using whatever weapon your colonists have equipped, even if it was just a wooden club, the Gatling gun lowers its aiming time with each successive shot, eventually firing at a pretty steady pace. Unfortunately, its accuracy is basically non-existent, and it'll need to be rearmed with more steel every 150 shots, of which it'd probably land about 10. Even someone with a maxed aiming skill firing this thing at a wall will still miss constantly, so save yourself the trouble and just don't use them.
And on that terrible disappointment,
we wrap up Settlers. I'd say this is likely the easiest introduction to a factions mod for someone new to Rimworld modding. It adds just a little bit to everything, getting you familiar in dealing with new factions, learning to actually look at new gear before going up against it and being caught out, especially in the case of things like a double action revolver. I'd hazard a guess that this is probably a background inclusion for a lot of people. You're rarely making use of any of its features yourself, but the faction variety alone is enough to include it, and a couple of extra recreation sources never hurt. Thanks for watching, folks. If you have any mods you'd like to see a full breakdown for, or suggestions of mods you'd like to see covered, feel free to leave them in the comments, I might get around to them. I'll be back again soon with another Rimworld mod rundown. Wherever you are in the world, enjoy the rest of your morning, afternoon or evening. Take care.